Thank you, Pixie. I'm glad we got that cleared up.
Yes, we did indeed. Our speaker today, Wendy Karr, is a licensed Unity teacher. But as importantly, Wendy holds a master's degree in history and archival administration. In her 30 plus years in Unity, Wendy has made a study of the development and growth of the Unity movement. And today, she's going to share with us some of her findings of the African American experience during the 20th century, all just in time for Black History Month. So Wendy, please come on and enlighten us all, and everybody, let's welcome Wendy.
Good morning, everybody. It's wonderful to be back with Unity of White Rock. It's been a while, and I trust you are well and that the weather is good there. I'm covered in snow here in Ontario, but that's par for the course in February. So when I was invited to do something on Black History Month, I kind of said, so I have never done this before. I am actually going to give you some caveats before I start. So as those of you who can see me can see, I am white. I am also Canadian. I do have American family, but I do not pretend to understand the American experience. The story that I'm about to present is American and is representative of the Black experience. And just as a sidebar, the Black experience in Canada in Unity hasn't really been adequately explored, so it's not included. So I don't have a wonderful, here's your Canadian moment for you. But in talking with friends and family who are Black, because I have quite a diverse family and I'm blessed to have a wonderful circle of friends like that, I said to them, I'm feeling kind of uncomfortable. And they pointed out that as a historian, it's my job to tell stories, to tell the facts, to tell what was without interpretation, just to present the facts. And somebody said to me, is there anyone else who could do this talk for you who's Black? And I had to think about it, and I couldn't come up with someone, which tells you another whole story, another Sunday talk right there. But that if we keep it quiet, if we don't discuss these things, the past hurts can't be addressed and the current damage continues. So with that, those of you, I know I recognize a few names on the screen that you've been in classes with me. Let's get into some history. Let's get into some context before I tell you some great stories. So why Black History Month? Well, Black History Month dispels these terrible myths and in the process helps Black people to become prouder of themselves and their ancestors. Something I've discovered in talking with my cousins, I have cousins who were born in Zambia and cousins who were born in Kenya. So they have a different understanding perhaps than those who are descended from the slave trade. But in talking with them over the last couple of years, as we're becoming more aware of things, what I came to understand is that for many people, it's a ledger. If a white person gets something, that means a Black person doesn't. If a Black person gets something, a white person doesn't. And that's not the absolute truth about the situation. The absolute truth is that it's an opportunity for us to come together and talk about things. I found out that my cousins in Toronto had been carded by police, which took me aback because in terms of finances, they're a lot richer than I am. So I made assumptions based on their finances, not the color of their skin. So a little American background for you. In 1820 and 21, Missouri is admitted to the US, into the Union, as a slave state. At the same time, Maine was entered as a free state. And I just want you to get that because when I got that, that was a whole bunch of things fell into place for me. The fact that you came into the Union of the United States as a slave state, as a state that had slavery as an acceptable and credible and government approved way of living. 1945, so about 25 years later, we have Myrtle Fillmore. She's born in Ohio. 1854, Charles Fillmore, her husband and co-founder of the Unity Movement, is born in Minnesota. 1861, we have the beginning of the American Civil War, which is an interesting thing because Missouri was not equal in that. There were people who supported the Confederates and there were people who supported the Union. So there was a lot of chaos. And if you ever want to study it, that's like a microcosm of the Civil War, in my opinion. 1863, we have the Emancipation Proclamation saying that slavery is abolished and that the slaves are to be freed. However, Missouri, being a border state, is not subject to this proclamation. And in fact, slavery continues for 2 years on until 1865, when slavery is abolished across the country. And we finally get into a place of the 13th Amendment saying slavery will not be tolerated in the US Bay. A few years later, we get the 14th Amendment to the US Constitution, which gives citizenships to Blacks and guarantees them equal protection under the law. However, what we know is that didn't change the attitudes of people, that instead we see that Missouri is an area where there are quite a few lynchings that are documented, that it is not a safe place for people who are Black to live. And so we get an exodus out of Missouri. It comes up later. So 1889 is the founding of the Unity Movement. So we're still in an area where we haven't said, oh yes, everyone is created equal. We may be saying that, we may be preaching that from the pulpit, but it is not being reflected in daily life. 1896 is a banner year. That is the beginning of what has become known as the Jim Crow laws, which basically said that you could have segregation as long as it was separate and equal. And many of us in the history community knew that it wasn't equal, but that was what the law said. And so we have Kansas City, where the Fillmores founded Unity, a segregated city. And I wondered about that because as a historian, I'd gone through the archives of early photos. There were no Black people. And I said to myself, wait a minute, I've had Black instructors. I know Black ministers. What's the story here? What's happening? And what happens is this is an expression of the Jim Crow laws. And I'm not going to get into it too much, but I will acknowledge publicly that there were behaviors by the Fillmores and staff members that we would consider extremely racist in these days. At the time, because they lived in a segregated city, it was how things were. That is not to blame, shame, or condone their actions, but to acknowledge with some empathy that things were different then. And we don't necessarily have the capacity to go back and change that. So there has been change though, but it has taken a long time. We do know that by the 1920s, we're seeing photos of Charles and Myrtle with Black students. We know by the 1920s, we are seeing Black-only Unity centers, particularly in New York and other large cities. So I want to introduce you to a few people. I mean, this could be a 10-hour course easily. So I'm trying to give you a snippet, sort of an appetizer to get you interested in exploring a bit more. So Reverend Helen Moten, I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. She is one of the first Unity ministers, Black, to be ordained. Now, she has a really interesting history, I think. She began studying the principles in 1933. So Unity's already been around for quite a while by the time she gets interested. And she talks about in her application to become a minister about how she used the principles to help her husband be healed of a physical condition. She organized the Christ Unity Center in Los Angeles in 1973. So she'd had about 4 years of time to work with the principles. And those of us who've been around Unity know that it's not about just listening to a talk like this on a Sunday or whenever you're listening to this live stream, that it's about taking the principles and applying them in our day-to-day living. She became a licensed teacher in 1947, and she was ordained 5 years later in 1952, as I previously said, one of two of the first. The fact that it took that long for Unity to start ordaining ministers tells you a lot about the conditions in the US at the time, because it would have been probably against the law. I don't pretend to understand the Jim Crow laws particularly. I haven't studied them enough, but it definitely was not something you did. So the fact that we're moving away from that into an awareness that everyone is equal. And I give Helen credit because she purchased land and she had these cute little houses that were the centers for Los Angeles in the 30s and 40s. And she, I'm sure, blessed the community at quite a deep level. If you go to truthunity.net and put her name in, you can read her application to become a minister. And there's a lot of wonderful details and narrative in it. Reverend Corinne Smith was ordained 2 years later in 1954. She's one of the three that we have early on. She became a licensed teacher, as you can see, in 1938. And I give her such credit to be in Houston, Texas, to be a Black person in Houston, Texas, leading a unity ministry. In the experience I've had in my many years in being in unity, I sort of know when I'm in the Bible Belt. And Houston was one of those places. I knew I was in the Bible Belt. I knew I was in the South. I knew that there were some issues around what is race, what is appropriate. So I give her great blessing for this. So she was trained by Charles and his second wife, Cora. After Charles retired from the ministry, he and Cora would winter in California and do some speaking tours on the way between Missouri and California. So she sat literally at the feet of the master and learned in that way. So we know that the cracks were there. The cracks were starting of having Black people in in the community of unity. And there were still some problems, though. There were times that we see where Black people were kind of asked to sit at the back of the church or in the balcony if there was one. So there is segregation in unity. And it's hard to say because we teach, I mean, our name is unity. We teach oneness. And yet this human aspect of ourselves keeps popping up. And I invite you just to be gentle about it and say, okay, we're all on a human path. Perhaps there is something that I'm doing that has contributed to this, and perhaps not. But to be open to the possibility that our founders were fallible, that our founders were products of their time, and that we can be gentle with ourselves because we do not have to seek perfection at the same time. Now, Dr. James Elliott, what I find really interesting is you do not find a lot of men early on. You find the women are the ones that are the keepers. And that's why I wanted to talk about love, because this is about loving a message so much that you will begin to, consider putting yourself potentially in harm's way, particularly if you are in a segregated community, in order to share these principles. Dr. James Elliott, as you can see, he was a dentist first. The fact that he graduated from Michigan as a dentist, having come through a family that was plasterers, and he actually apprenticed as a plasterer first. He served in Chicago and Detroit, both cities where we know there are large Black communities. So he became a licensed unity teacher in 1941, and we don't know a lot about him, but again, if you go to the primary resource material, you see how he expressed the understanding he had of these principles and his profound desire to share them with the world. I love this picture. This is from one of the first times Unity acknowledged Black History Month. And I am blessed to say, I met Johnny Coleman, I met Ruth Mosley. I was in service with Argentina Glasgow. She would come to our church as a guest speaker from time to time. And I have heard all of the others speak at some point or another, primarily at conventions. And for me, this was a big moment when I sort of started to understand how unity was when we peeled away the racist attitudes of the time. because I came out of a church that was primarily white. I came into Unity, which was a beautiful mix of the whole spectrum of colors. When I went to Unity Village to take my licensed teacher training, I had quite a few Black instructors. So I never thought that there was a problem, because it just seemed like everything was in oneness. And over time, I have learned that that was not quite the truth. So some of you may know Johnny Coleman. She created her own school. That's a whole other lesson right there. And from her school, we have Della Reese, famous for Touched by an Angel. Unity kind of adopted her, as I will show you in a moment. But these people all held on to the principles, had great love for humanity, realized what it could do to help people understand. And by reaching out into the Black community, they realized that they could share these principles and move us towards a greater sense of oneness. Pearl Wood is not a Unity minister, but she is a New Thought leader. She was a conscious spiritual living minister. She's often known as the mother of CSL, to go with Ernest Wilson, who was, sorry, not Ernest Wilson, Ernest Holmes, who was the founder of CSL. And she is honored in a booklet that Unity produced a couple years ago for Black History Month, because she influenced so many people in the greater New Thought movement, not just in CSL, but in Unity, in Johnny Coleman's church, in other Black communities in the New Thought. Della Reese, until her passing, she actually had a podcast on Unity Online Radio. And I checked this morning, and there are still archived speeches of hers where she talks about the importance of the word and how you create and how you manifest. She founded her own church, Understanding Principles for Better Living Church, also known as the Up Church in Los Angeles. She started with 8 people in her living room. That was her original church. That was her original ministry. And from that, it grew quite a bit. So it's important for us to remember that, you know, that tiny mustard seed of love, that tiny idea is so important to the greater good. Of course, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., be an agent of harmony in the world. One of the things that happened, I started in Unity in 1984. And by 1993, so after I had started, I was actually starting to take courses with great regularity by this point. And I was meeting with and being trained by Black people. But it wasn't until 1993 that the ministerial students said, enough. We need this history to come out of the shadows. We need to acknowledge that certain terms were used from the pulpit that were inappropriate and hurtful. We need to do this. So they began doing, there's a video that they produced, there's articles that they produced, and they began to peel back the layers and say, yes, the principles are sound, and we need to acknowledge the human side that wasn't in principle. In 2003, so 10 years later, there was a joint statement called Enhancing the Dream that was issued by Tom Zender, who was the CEO of Unity School at the time, and the late Glenn Mosley, who was the CEO of the Association of Unity Churches, which is now Unity Worldwide Ministries. And they formally apologized for the racial history of Unity and offered to conduct a healing circle. And that happened, that healing ceremony happened in 2004 as part of Martin Luther King Jr. Day. Unity leaders apologized and acknowledged past discrimination against Black people. This is one of my favorite lines of Maya Angelou, the idea that as we can build and release the hurts, not the memories, we don't want to necessarily forget that there was a time when things weren't right, but to move into a rising, into a sharing, into a place where we can have these discussions, where we can discuss what was and what needs to be going forwards. One of the things I've noticed, particularly in the last few years, say 5 years, is this increase, is this movement at Unity headquarters to encourage diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I love that one of the things that they have done is created what they call IDEA: inclusion, diversity, equity, and acceptance. And to be in that place of calm, of acknowledging our oneness, regardless of the outer appearances. Diversity shows the beauty in our differences without making excuses for them. What we can bring from this, and I'm actually realizing and thinking back to some times when I have spoken at primarily Black Unity Centers, some mistakes I've made in the past that I fortunately was able to apologize for in the time. And now I know better and I can move forward. Unity has a project right now called Standing Together. If you go to unity.org, you will find a link to this page. We need profound change that preserves and protects the human rights of every individual. And as we move into our time of meditation, I invite you to take this thought with you. When I look at you, I can only see God. And let us just take a few moments to breathe into the oneness, into the space where within ourselves we feel that incredible connection, not only to the divinity within each of us, but to that divinity within every person. And just allowing ourselves to take a few deep breaths. The past is in the past. The future is in the future. This is the now moment. This is our moment to connect. This is our moment to listen. And as hard as it is to acknowledge past mistakes, we are open and receptive to the idea of being shown our past mistakes. Because it is through these past errors of thinking, these past errors of acting, these past errors of belief, that we can move forward, healing the world, coming to a space where we truly see God in each other. From Unity Headquarters, a prayer for abundant justice and love. As one in divine presence, we embrace our common humanity. We are held in the loving arms of Spirit, and we rise above fear to walk in love, faith, and peace. We release any beliefs that divide us and turn to one another with understanding. Wisdom reveals the path to healing for our communities. With unity of purpose, we create justice, equality, and peace for all people. In the abundance of God, there is enough love, enough peace, and enough freedom for all to live together as one. We hold this vision of healing and harmony for ourselves, our communities, and our world. And let us just breathe on these words for a few moments in the silence. And as we come to a closure of our time of prayer and meditation, the statement of unity for diversity, inclusion, equity, and diversity. Together, we embrace our individuality. We celebrate our uniqueness with full acceptance of all people, including every expression of the divine. We come together with love and compassion to be a light for all. We stand together in unity. And so it is, and so it shall be. Amen. And now let us join Nelson in singing This Big Light of Mine.
Thank you, Wendy, and I'd like to thank and acknowledge Wendy for that change in the word there from this little light of mine to this big light of mine. Thank you for that, Wendy. This big light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This big light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This big light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Now when in darkness, I'm gonna let it shine. When in darkness, I'm gonna let it shine. When in darkness, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Now on Monday gave me the gift of love. Tuesday peace came from above. Wednesday told me to have more faith. Thursday gave me a little more grace. Friday told me to watch and pray. Saturday told me what to say. On Sunday gave me the power to mind. Let my little light shine. Oh, this big light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Oh, this great big light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This big light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. When I need an answer, I'm gonna let my light shine. When I need an answer, well, just let your light shine. That's the way. When I need an answer, gonna let my big light shine. Let it shine all the time. Now some say it's dark, I cannot see. Light shines off the world for me. Some say it's scary, you better go hide. We got the power to change the tide. Some see this life's a sad old story. We see a world that's bound for glory. The real power is yours and mine. Let your big light shine. This big light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This big light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This big light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. In my daily living, let your light shine. In my daily living, you bet I'm gonna let that light of mine shine. Every time around the town, I'm gonna let my big light shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Now the light that shines is the light above. Lights the darkness from above. Shines on me, shines on you. It shows you what the power of love can do. Gonna shine my light far and near. Shine my light loud and clear. If there's darkness in this time, I'm gonna let my little light shine. Oh, this big light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Yeah, this big light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This big light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Let it shine, brother and sisters. Thank you.
Wow, Nelson, that was amazing. My big light's taking up the whole room now. Thank you so much for your heartwarming and delightful songs. And your sound was wonderful. And Wendy, wow, what an inspiring and practical talk and message. We've got to go away and do some serious thinking about this. You were amazing. This information needs to get out there and help us move ahead deeper inside. So thank you so much for your message and your meditation. We're so blessed to have both of you with us today.